Welcome back, capital F football fans, to the O&O Sports YouTube channel. Week 0 is officially in the books, and boy, was it a good one. One of the best I can think of in recent memory. And today we'll be taking a closer look at some of those games from week 0. We're going to be going over our predictions for that week, for better or for worse. And we'll be going over the official O&O Sports week 1 power rankings. Be sure to stay tuned for all of that. And as always, if you enjoy, feel free to like and subscribe. It helps us out a ton. And without further ado, let's get into the week 0 recap. Starting off with our final scores. First, the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets upset the 10th ranked Florida State Seminoles in a nail biter. They win on a walk-off field goal, 24-21. And next, Montana State with an FBS victory over the New Mexico Lobos, 35-31. That game also being decided within the last few seconds of regulation. And after that, the SMU Mustangs hang on to defeat the Nevada Wolfpack at Nevada, 29-24. And last, in the late hours of the night, the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors defeat Delaware State 35-14. For our best performances, these are going to be individual performances that we think really stood out from the week prior. First, we have Montana State running back Adam Jones. He had 17 carries for a monster 167 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Lobos. Next is SMU tight end RJ Maryland. He had a very strong performance against the Wolfpack. He was Preston Stone's top target with 8 receptions and over 160 receiving yards and a touchdown. And our next best performance is going to come from the quarterback from Montana State, Tommy Mellott. He went 65.6% passing for just over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. And last in our best performances, we have New Mexico wide receiver Luke Wyzong. And despite his team losing, he racked up 95 yards on 6 receptions. And following our best performances, we have the O&O Sports Team of the Week. We'll be choosing a team that we think had the best overall performance of the week for one reason or another. And this week, of course, you could probably guess, it is going to be the Yellow Jackets of Georgia Tech in their upset victory over Florida State. Who saw that coming? Definitely not us. And for your player of the week, we have none other than Georgia Tech's Jamal Haynes. We had this going either way with him and their quarterback, Haynes King. He also had a great performance, but we think Jamal Haynes was an instrumental factor in that upset victory. He ran the ball 11 times for 75 yards and 2 touchdowns, 2 very big touchdowns. And he also managed to reel in 2 receptions for an additional 16 yards to help propel Georgia Tech to victory. And going into our closer looks, we're starting off with none other than Florida State. And if we jumped the gun by rating them so high in our off-season predictions, they were ranked 10th in both the AP and coaches poll, and we had them ranked as high as 5th in our post-spring rankings from a few months ago. Had we done another rankings later on in the offseason, it probably would have been a little bit lower, but still pretty high. And their performance in Ireland was shaky at best. They obviously take the L. We didn't think the offense had to be spectacular for them to get the victory, and they weren't by any means. They managed just under 300 total yards and 2 touchdowns. But the biggest issue for Florida State was that the defense could not stop the run, something that came as a bit of a surprise to many of us. The front 7 was very dominant at times last year. They had a little trouble stopping the run, but were able to get big stops when it mattered the most. But against Georgia Tech this season, they gave up almost 200 rushing yards alone to go along with nearly 150 passing yards. They just got flat out outplayed on the ground, and that was instrumental in their downfall. And to answer the question of did we overrate Florida State, our answer is probably. We still think Florida State can bounce back. We think they have 10 wins in them this year, despite playing a pretty rough ACC schedule. We knew they weren't going to be as explosive on offense, and we said it would take their defense a couple of weeks to work up to their full potential in our last video, but we still think they might have been a bit preemptive in our Florida State ranking. We'll have them much lower in this go around. Still not bad. We don't think they're a bad team. We think they can still even make the ACC championship and maybe even the playoff, but definitely not as good as we predicted this offseason. And following Florida State, we're taking a look at the New Mexico Lobos. New Mexico was the underdog going into their matchup versus the FCS juggernauts of Montana State, but they had a healthy lead going into the fourth quarter that they ultimately squandered in dramatic fashion, giving up over 260 yards in their final 3 drives of the game, which, if you're not a math person, is over 87 yards on average per drive. And that obviously cannot happen if you want to win football games. Montana State went on to score 21 unanswered points to solidify their comeback, and even though they were the underdog in this matchup, this still shocked us here at Ono Sports. We picked New Mexico to win the game, and we were feeling pretty good about it up until those final drives, and it really set in when the broadcasting crew brought up a stat that we somehow overlooked, and we're dubbing it the Bronco Buster. We had faith that Bronco Mendenhall would come in at New Mexico and toughen up that defense, and for the most part he did, but then everything unraveled, and that is not dissimilar to his starts at his previous programs. In each of his first games at both BYU in 2005 and Virginia in 2016, he lost big time. At BYU in 2005, they lost to Boston College in their first game 3-20. And then in 2016, the Virginia Cavaliers lost 20-37 versus FCS opponent Richmond. And now he adds another FCS loss in his first game at New Mexico, this time to the Montana State Bobcats. And after the Lobos, we have to talk about the SMU Mustangs. The Mustangs were able to pull off an impressive comeback win in the fourth quarter, scoring 16 unanswered to top the Nevada Wolfpack. But if you recall in our prediction from just a few short days ago, we had SMU going over Nevada by much more. So SMU fans, I've got good news and I've got bad news. The good news is you won. You were able to rally late, and that was in large part due to the play of your quarterback, Preston Stone, who looked great in those final drives. And there's a lot to be said about that, but the bad news in this situation is that this game wasn't against Clemson, wasn't against NC State or UNC, not even a weaker conference opponent. It was against Nevada. Now, for what it's worth, Nevada looked significantly better in this game than they did in almost any game they played last year, but it's still Nevada. This is a team that you need to trounce in week 1 because they are not nearly as talented of a roster and overall as a program, and you had to pull off a big comeback to beat them. And that was in large part due to the fact that the defense looked pretty soft up until those final drives, when it felt like they finally turned it up a notch, which gives us a little bit of hope for them this year, seeing as we now know that they have another level to reach. They're just going to need to reach it sooner rather than later. We can't wait to the fourth quarter to turn it up to that level anymore, especially if they want to see a bowl game this year. Can't be doing that, just cannot be doing that. And after our closer looks, we have a prediction update. We aren't hiding from them, we promise. Here they are. If you follow us on Twitter or Instagram, you've already seen them. And in our first week, we nearly went 1-3. Thank you, SMU. I know we kind of just trashed you a little bit, but thank you for sparing us from an under 500 week to start the season. Obviously, we were wrong about Florida State and New Mexico, and that puts us at 2-4 this week and on the year. And if the season ended today, one of our followers on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok would be winning $100 because we are well below that 75% threshold. So if you haven't, go follow us on those platforms if you want a chance at $100 come December. But thankfully for us and for all college football fans, we have many more weeks to go. We think next week is our week. We won't be talking about the early week 1 games in our video coming out on Friday, so be sure to follow us on our socials to see our picks in those games, because Todd and I have been in the lab cooking up some heat for you guys. And last in this video, we'll be going into our official week 1 power rankings developed by myself and my good friend Todd. Everybody say hi to Todd. No, really, say it. He gets upset if you don't say hello to him. Thank you. And starting off with the bottom row, numbers 25 through 21, we have Iowa at 25, Florida State dropping all the way to 24, Kansas State at 23, Georgia Tech jumping into the top 25 at 22, and Iowa State at 21. Some big moves here. Obviously, we don't have a lot to work with, but Todd is very high on Georgia Tech after their performance, and he has convinced us to put them in our top 25 heading into week 1. And following that, for the next row, number 20 through number 16, at 20 we have USC, followed by Virginia Tech at 19, NC State at 18, Oklahoma State at 17, and Miami at 16. A lot to work with here. We've got USC in the top 20, which may be a bit of a surprise, but from everything we're hearing, it's been a great spring and fall camp over in LA, and they're going to be a much tougher team heading into the Big Ten this season than a lot of people might think. And next, at the 15 through 11 spots, starting with 15, we have Oklahoma, followed by the reigning national champions of Michigan at 14, Clemson at 13, Utah at 12, and LSU at 11. These are going to be our prove it teams, all for different reasons. Brian Kelly has had a few solid seasons at LSU, but he's going to have to prove that LSU can be a playoff team under his tutelage. Utah is in their first season in the Big 12. They're going to have to prove that they can run that conference, which a lot of people think they can. Clemson's going to have to prove that they can make their methodology work in this new era. And Michigan's going to have to prove that they don't need Jim Harbaugh or the other team's signs to compete for a national title. And Oklahoma has to prove that they belong with the big dogs in the SEC. And heading into our top 10, at 10 we have Penn State, followed by Tennessee at 9, Missouri at 8, Alabama at 7, and Notre Dame at 6. These 5 teams all have something that we think put them over the edge, that solidifies them as borderline elite teams. For Penn State and Notre Dame, it's going to be their top-notch defenses. And for the 3 SEC teams sandwiched in between them, it's going to be their all-around completeness that sets them apart from teams like Clemson or USC or even a Utah or LSU that we think are lacking in some other key aspect. And for the top 5, at 5 we have Ole Miss, Oregon at 4, Texas at 3, Ohio State at 2, and Georgia at number 1. There's really no explanation needed. These teams are the best of the best, the cream of the crop, and we think all 5 of these teams are either great or elite on both sides of the ball, especially those top 2 teams. But don't sleep on 3 through 5. They are all dangerous, and we are ready to see them in action. And that's going to wrap it up for this video. Like we said at the beginning, be sure to like and subscribe. If you want a chance at $100, be sure to go follow us on social media, and be sure to share with your best friends, your biggest enemies, your neighbor, your grandma, whoever you can think of. We appreciate it a lot. And with that being said, thank you for watching, and we will see you in the week 1 preview.